Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we're exploring Weimar cinema, that glorious period of the 1920s in Germany. And today's title, the 1921 film Destiny, directed by the great Fritz Lang. Perhaps this is his first great film. Framed as a fairy tale, this tells a story of the struggle of love against death. Is there destiny? We'll be talking about that and much else after today's screening with a noted expert on Fritz Lang, Geoffrey O'Brien. Now enter the incredible cinematic world of Fritz Lang in Destiny. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to see a fully restored copy of Fritz Lang's Destiny, one of the key films of the early years of Weimar cinema. It's also arguably the first mature work of Fritz Lang, still a very young filmmaker. There's a lot to talk about this film, and we have an old friend of City Cinematheque, and I've got to say, not your first rodeo with Fritz Lang on City Cinematheque. Several years ago, we talked about several other.
Spiona, right?
Absolutely the case. So I'd like to reintroduce a good friend of the show, Geoffrey O'Brien, a critic, poet, and essayist. Many people know his writings from such publications as the New York Review of Books, and he's published widely on Fritz Lang in actually 3 of the books that you have published. So it's a real pleasure to have you back to talk about Fritz.
Nice to be here.
Okay, so let's just place the film briefly in Fritz Lang's career.
Well, he had been in the war and was wounded, and then after that he started to write and wrote some screenplays and worked his way into the film industry rather rapidly, actually, and within a few years was directing, and he had already made 7 features before, but in a period of only 2 years, including the Spiders, which is actually a very impressive 2-part serial that has many elements that show up in his later work. But yeah, Destiny, which came out in 1921, really is the pivotal moment in his career. It's the first time he made a film which was widely respected, not only in Germany, but especially in France, where it made an enormous impression, and then eventually around the world. And then, of course, he immediately followed that with a string of movies like Dr. Mabuse, The Nibelungen, Metropolis, and so on. So
before he ends up, shaping film noir in the United States, we do have M, a film that many people will have seen. It made Peter Lorre an international star, and as taught as it should be in course after course about the transition to sound and how creative sound can be in that particular era. So we're talking about, but that's 10 years ahead, we're talking about a young man who's only making his 8th feature film, but this is a mature work in all kinds of ways.
Well, it shows him really experimenting in so many different ways, and given the nature of the scenario, he has a lot of opportunities to do that.
Yeah, so let's talk about that setup, that allows him to do that. What's the structure?
Well, I mean, Lang was obviously a very structurally oriented person and filmmaker, and this film announces its form in so many different ways. It bills itself as a poem in 6 stanzas, and 3 of those stanzas are in fact 3 stories, each taking place in a different era. And then there is also another device, which is really the most important of all, in which the whole latter part of the movie, despite appearances, actually takes place within a period of 2 hours, from 10 p.m. to midnight, which is carefully noted with the clock and also by a night watchman telling us the time. So all of these subdivisions, each of these subdivisions has its own mode, its own, the interpolated stories each has a different background, a different style, a different mood. And the film really moves through so many different modes, from a kind of folktale timelessness to really a fairly brutal realism at the end.
Absolutely.
We end up with that fire in the infirmary. And at that point, it has an almost documentary quality, especially since Lang was very fond of fires, and he liked to do them as realistically as possible.
Well, and also, just to mention, it follows the most, how shall I put it, the most magical and whimsical of all of the tales, the one in which we have a flying carpet, the way in which we're clearly in some kind of timeless mythical Middle Kingdom of China. You know, it's high Orientalism in a certain kind of way, and so it's the most artificial of all of it.
I mean, if you think of it, okay, I mean, it's called Destiny in English, but I mean, the German title is Der müde Tod. You know, the weary death, or really, death is tired.
Tired death,
death is tired of.
Yeah, and as death says, if you had this job, you'd be tired too.
Yeah, and you know, and that is expressed so strongly by the performance of Bernhard Goetzke. Who dominates the film just by his presence, and is obviously the link to everything, because he is the end of every episode inevitably.
Well, and continuing with the flame object, just with that motif, of course, we have the candles that each goes out, and again, it's very interesting to note different titles in different countries, because the title in France was Les Trois Lumières, the three lights, and so the marking of each one of those is the flame going out. And only to follow up on your point, that is contrasted with the intense realism of the huge flame that constitutes the fire in the infirmary.
Well, you know, if you consider that, you know, it's a film about death. I mean, that is absolutely the subject, but it goes through a range of possible reactions, and the interpolated stories actually allow a distancing. Because, well, especially the last, because it's whimsical, and in a sense, it makes death a kind of fairy tale event. And the others as well, they take place in old or semi-mythical, I mean, the Arabian Nights, and then a version of the Italian Renaissance that is really out of old paintings. And then by the time you get to the end, then the reality of death suddenly becomes much more inescapable. I mean, you're in an infirmary, old people, dying people, the mortuary where the final scene is played out, and the fire, of course, which is so real that there's no... we're no longer in a fairy tale world or a folk tale world.
Let me talk about death and something that is not in any frame of the film, but because it's a film made in the early 1920s and released in that moment, there is an experience of death that hangs over the entire film, and that experience is called World War I.
Yeah. Well, it's made 3 years after the end.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, it's worth just taking a moment to recover the level of devastation of that war. I mean, the first global war of industrial warfare. And for my money, it's also very interesting that, you know, it's a very typical movie choice to take a romantically engaged, very attractive young couple. Okay, many movies from many genres in many nations do that. But in this case, in doing this, you're also talking about the generation most affected by the war.
Yeah.
We're talking about countries in which 1 in every 4 or 5 males were killed.
And Germany, the German casualties were higher, I think, along with Russia. Were
the highest in the highest in the war. So there's a way in which, for the film's first historical audience, there's a resonance of death and of a young woman who's, all of a sudden she leaves the room and she comes back, and all of a sudden her fiance, her lover, is gone, which you do not have to be a very smart allegorist to say, that this is the experience that many young women had of he went away and never returned.
It can be read on really so many levels, because, I mean, the figure of death, who's, an allegorical figure, and yet due in part to the power of the actor, he in fact is the most human, fully human figure in the film, or at least that's how I see it.
No, and I think that's absolutely correct, because also one of the things that makes this film different and humanizes death, if that's not a paradoxical thing to say about this allegorical character, is that in so many portrayals of death, in so many narratives, death has this kind of absolute power that's willful. And here, he can't stop doing what he's doing, but it's not of his will. He's capable of articulating that he has been tasked with doing something, that he cannot escape from that task, but coming back to the original title, but it is wearying. He is constantly moved in some sense by the task that he has.
And Bernhard Goetzke manages to convey this with really a very subtle performance.
Correct.
As against, Lil Dachhofer is a more melodramatic actress.
Right.
And then so many of the supporting characters are in fact comic grotesques. All of the town's officials, the mayor and the notary and so forth, are all these absurd figures.
Right.
Whereas death has a gravity that makes them look silly when they approach him and try to get his secrets out of him, and he dismisses them.
Well, and this also points us in this direction of, how should I put it? Lang in his later and less spectacular films because of budgets, when he was in Hollywood, there's great subtlety in the psychology that he portrays of people in many of the noir films. And that's where he focused his resources as a storyteller and filmmaker. Here, this is a film about death that's not a psychological film about it. Yes, she suffers, she wants her lover back, but I simply come back to the title. This is much more about dealing in this kind of metaphysical way with the concept of destiny. Can you negotiate in any way with this? And there's, it is the set of tests over that negotiation.
And of course, his genius, and this is really where it comes out fully for the first time, is to make the construction of the film, the actual building of the sets, the design, and then the way in which that is photographed, the vehicle for the emotion.
Correct.
You could say the psychology is in the design. And for example, the whole idea of the wall, death builds the wall that no one can enter.
Right.
And then the maiden, Lil Dachhofer, having lost her fiancé, goes in search of him and sees the procession of the dead superimposed on the wall. And then she herself is able to enter the wall, but her entrance is into this narrow aperture with a very beautiful dome at the top, with an endless staircase that we see her going up. But just that image alone is such pure Lang, and then that kind of predicts a lot of where he goes in the Nibelung in terms of design. And then immediately thereafter, we find ourselves inside in that hall of candles,
Right.
each representing a human life, all of different heights,
Right.
depending on the length of the life. And, I think that image alone is probably the most powerful thing in the movie, and certainly what people came away with. The originality of that, even though, the metaphor of a candle as a representation of human life is a commonplace, and there's nothing original about the idea, but the realization of that image is just had never been seen before and has remained a powerful image.
This is a much written about film. And there's been very good writing about the film. You and I are both, for example, admirers of the work that Tom Gunning, the distinguished film scholar, has done on this. Another one of the people has talked about how this is a film in which there's a kind of alternation between the narrative axis of the film and the poetic axis of the film. And I think when you're talking about some of these incredibly powerful images that I think most of us will, certainly take away from the film. Whether you can recount the plot of each one of those interpolated episodes, maybe I can't 3 days later. But I certainly still do remember that wall, and I remember death standing against the wall, and I remember that's the impact that scalar relationship, has.
Well, the long shot, where we see simply death in front of the wall, and that's it. I mean, again, that's a pure Fritz Lang concept. And then there's a close-up to, but no camera movement, just the long shot, the close-up, and then subsequently we have that more comic thing of the townspeople creeping toward him, trying to weasel out his secret, and then scattering away. Those moments are so distinctive, and then on a different in a different tone, those shots of, for example, the apothecary gathering herbs by moonlight. There's a shot that is actually, I believe, a close replication of a Caspar David Friedrich painting,
right?
In composition, but in this context, it's has this eerie power, and everything to do with the apothecary, because then the whole movie, in a way, turns out to hinge in a way on him, because in other words, she collapses, he finds her,
right,
and takes her to his shop. And she decides to drink poison in order to be with their lost beloved. And she pours it into a glass, she raises it to her lips, and then next thing we know, she's in the realm of death. And the movie happens, all these three stories and all of that. And then she loses, in each episode, she fails to save someone from death. So finally, death offers her the last chance, and she accepts that, and then she's right back where she was, and about to drink the poison. The apothecary comes over, and then everything proceeds. But now we're in the realm of reality. We're no longer in this counter world of fanciful locations, and everything that happens from that point on is thoroughly real, and she's trying to get people to give up their life,
right?
And they treat her as an enemy and as a figure of horror, and that to me is a very interesting thing, because since the maiden is not really an individuated character much, at this point she really changes. Once she has the idea that she can get what she wants by taking someone else's life, she's almost a vampire. She's trying to con people basically into dying so that she can get what she wants, and they react accordingly. And especially the scene in the infirmary, when she comes in and realizes that there are all these old and sick people who are complaining bitterly about life and saying, oh, wouldn't it be great not to have to wake up in the morning? And she smiles like, oh,
I've got him now.
I found what I'm looking for. And she says, okay, in that case, give me a life. And they run in horror. Mm-hmm. And in running, they start this fire, which then turns into the conflagration that leads to the whole end of the movie. And it's all strung together so impeccably. I mean, the editing of the film throughout, I mean, but especially in that last sequence, is the logic of it, the speed of it, everything leads to the next thing. And you know,
it actually renders a classical climax to the film, because it's the most exciting sequence at the kind of level of action, you know, but it's also the most affective. It's effective, artistically, but it's also affective because we know what the stakes are in this real world now, not off into. And I think we both admire a particular phrase that the critic Tom Gunning uses about that moment in which.
Oh wait, I did write that down so as not to misquote him. Most of the film takes place within a crease in the fabric of time.
What a lovely phrase.
And Gunning goes into great detail about the editing and the use of superimpositions and dissolves as tokens of transition from one level to another. And it has a logic to it. Nothing is just an improvised effect. It all. Well,
what's interesting to me about the experience of the film is that time is intertwined in two ways. That is, as a progression of images. It's a linear progression of images that are compelling as such. But at the same time, as soon as you introduce the characters and the story, then the portrayal of the ability of time to be nonlinear, and also to space-time to have all kinds of other realms other than that of daily life is there all over the film. That's part of a film that looks simple but is actually very complicated at a minimum in the number of realms of experience and how they relate to this character, who we both agree is not defined psychologically, but she is defined in terms of her progress through this quest and the mourning, because it's an act of mourning. It's a quest to find him, but it's an act of mourning as well, and coming to terms with what she understands is his death.
Well, there is that ending, which again, I mean, is typical of Lang sometimes, to have these endings that don't quite parse the way, there's a sense of doubleness. Like, is this really the ending, or is this just a kind of what we wish was the ending? Because, death enfolds the two lovers who are now, they are superimposition, so they're all phantoms, and leads them out of the mortuary. And then death disappears, and then there they are, restored to what they were in the beginning, two living people on top of this hill, and then it's midnight, and you can make of that, what you will.
Well, and this is actually one of the things to put this film also in this broader context of the series that I've programmed. That there are any number of films of the Weimar cinema that partake of this intentional failure to fully resolve certain issues, because they're actually portrayed as something that one needs to continue working through, or it would be dishonest to give a particular kind of wrapped up ending. Again, many people have talked about this film because of its episodic structure in relationship to something like Griffith's Intolerance. And one of the things about Intolerance is that one of the stories gets wrapped up, because Griffith is so good at it, in the perfect Hollywoodian kind of way. Whereas here, what you've just pointed out is, well, we have actually we have the four stories, and we have the three interpolated, and then we have the final one but she doesn't get to win in the traditional sense, and then there is this ambiguity about the very nature of the domain, the being in a domain.
And of course, those interpolated stories, however whimsical the Chinese story may be, and however exotic and picturesque the other ones may be, they're fundamentally extremely cruel stories.
Oh, absolutely.
There's absolutely no mercy, and I mean, there's stories about a figure of authority arbitrarily killing someone.
You know, a person could bring attitudes like that into something like the American cinema, and you might end up with film noir. No, there is that kind of cynicism about there is a game here, and you maybe think that you can play it.
Well, I mean, the Arabian Nights episode ends with the lover buried alive.
Right.
And the Renaissance episode in particular has a cruelty, because you have Rudolf Kleinroger, who would go on to play Dr. Mabuse,
right,
as the jealous husband who manipulates the situation in order to make his fiancée or his betrothed responsible for her lover's death. And he is he kind of takes over the movie for a moment, because he's a strong actor and he just has that presence.
But I'm gonna have to take over this moment, because as usual, we've run out of time, even though there are many, many more things to explore about this wonderful and highly accomplished film. If you'd like to know more about City Cinematheque, or more generally about City University Television, there's a way to do so. Go to our website, www.tv.cuny.edu. Also, at that website, you're going to find a way to communicate with us to get our app, and you can download it and stream CUNY TV. So visit www.tv.cuny.edu. Geoffrey, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you for your insight.
Same here.
Okay, and that's it for now from City Cinematheque. Hope to see you again as we continue our stroll through the archives of film history.